Welcome to our show today. I'm Mary Hassan, and along with my co-host, Mikey Hill, we are hosting a series called Parenting Today, Real Life, Real People, Real Faith. And we have a special guest today, Dr. Ray Guarendi. Dr. Ray is, he's an expert on all aspects of parenting, but he's a clinical psychologist. But more importantly for our purposes, he's a father of 10, so he really knows how to live what he preaches. You can access Dr. Ray's wisdom anytime you choose at drray.com. Am I correct on that, Dr. Ray?
It is. The part about the kids, though.
Yeah.
I have 10. My wife says she has 11.
Now, who might that be? Who might that extra kid be?
That 11th one, she said, is her most problem child.
Well, we're glad that she's given you to us for today.
Thank you.
And today we're going to be talking about marriage. And we understand that you've got some tips for
My wife
all
and I
of
have been
us.
married 7 happy years. 7 happy years.
Now, wait a minute.
Well, we've been married 24, but 7 happy ones. 7 happy ones. There was a fascinating study done by these sociologist types, the ones who say, well, good marriages, that's communication. You got to link,
Right.
you got to know each other emotionally. They did a study of durable marriages, 50 plus years type stuff. And they wanted to find out what were the key factors. They went into it with foreordained notions. Well, they concluded that the key factor in these durable marriages was what they called the yes, dear factor. The guys,
I think I heard about this.
The guys
yeah.
had learned essentially over all those years, yes, dear, yes, dear, whatever you say.
So has Randy trained you well?
I'm going to ask her, and if she tells me that she has, I'll agree.
And you'll say yes,
All
dear.
right.
Say yes,
All right.
dear.
Well, good. Well, let's hear from the wisdom of Dr. Ray, but also in light of your very real experience with your own marriage. But what can you tell us? Marriage is a tough struggle for
If you
many
want to make
people.
it last and be happy, it is, isn't it?
So, well,
It's easy for the 7 years, right?
Oh yeah, you can be like most marriages now. You can be slip knots, and they can fade away after 3, 5, 8 years. But you're talking the kind of marriage that you're saying, Mary, is a committed thing, and you're absolutely right. Is it a struggle? Now that's an interesting perspective. Would you say, ladies, that if a marriage is good, it's solid between two loving, committed people, it gets easier over time?
from the women I speak to, I wouldn't say that's necessarily true.
Really? So you find that even in the most durable, solid marriages, it doesn't necessarily get smoother? That in fact, new things crop up?
Imagine.
New
Yeah,
questions?
yeah.
Give me some examples.
As life stages change, you have different challenges with children that you might deal with differently. Or when a husband enters a retirement stage, that can be a challenge. I remember several of my mother's friends talking about that all of a sudden their husbands were home all the time, and their domain, which they had very much enjoyed, their sphere of influence, shall we say, at home, was all of a sudden intruded upon. So all things like that are going to present new challenges, I think, in any relationship.
Does it cause stress? Or
Yeah. I feel like this is perhaps a little bit of a trick question, and maybe we have to...
Where's he going here?
Yeah. I think you fell for this one, Mary. You know, does it get easier? Is it less work? No. Is it a little, I mean, as you grow in love in Christ, together as two humans, you do understand there are some predictable patterns. I mean, you know, Tim and I know when we're in a compromised position, and one will, you know, kind of, set the pick, for the other one. Tim and I will, over time, we've been married 28 years, okay, that's just not going to work. Or, I've just got to send her to bed. Or, leave Dad alone. He's got to finish his job, and then we can do this. It's better off to be late for the bowling game. So I think that the commonalities and the predictability, as you know, the person might use the word smoother, but easier and less work, absolutely not. Because then all those different, again, you have, the fountain of youth, fails. You've got, extended family coming in. You've got the in-laws. You've got grandkids. You've got success or unsuccess in a career. But I think you get to know the person in a way that becomes more compatible and more symbiotic.
Yeah, I think that knowledge that you have of the person, don't you feel like he's the
I feel like we're
psychologist
getting
kind of
set up by
evaluating him here?
we're getting set up by Philippe the Shrink. I'm sure of it now.
I will have a double-spaced typed report on the desk
Okay,
here.
all right, all right.
folks,
Just
at
don't
network.
share it with our
I
audience
think,
here,
you know,
okay?
her license where it says, you know, female, I think we just got an F on that test. Perhaps that's really what that F stood for.
No, obviously life circumstances change, and you have the benefit in a long-term marriage of knowing the other person and having a pattern of interaction. Hopefully you've worked it to a healthy point. But I think the human being, the human soul being what it is, you're always going to be challenged in terms of persevering with love. You can persevere with bitterness.
Are you saying, now see, I'm trained to say that. I'm professional, I can
So
say,
you're
are you
saying,
saying?
we're not paying you for this, though. Is that okay?
That one of the first principles of a good marriage is knowing what to let go that has been part of your marriage for a long time. For example, let's say you're neater than your spouse. And in the first 6 years of your marriage, that was a constant sore spot. Constant. He didn't pick up, he didn't shut the drawers. Everywhere he was, you could tell that he'd been through here. As you move through marriage, it agitates you less because you realize I'm either going to keep beating my head against this wall and create friction in our lives, or I'm just going to learn to pick up his socks, throw them in the hamper.
Now
Close the door.
Yeah, obviously there are issues like that, but here's the question. For many people, it's hard to figure out what are the kinds of things that you let go, what's on the level of socks that you say, oh, forget it, I'll just toss it in, and what's on a more significant level. What are the kinds of things that instead of picking up the socks and putting them in the hamper, you need to help the other person rise to a higher standard, to live more in the way that God wants them to live.
That's a great
So
question.
how do you make
great
that
question.
distinction?
And what I'm going to say is that you're going to have to let a lot more go of even the bigger stuff. Let's say that your spouse is irritable to the children. You don't like the way he or she talks. Your youngest child is now 9 years old. Your oldest is 17. This has been going on for 7 years and through the 9 years of your youngest child's life. At some point, you have to say, I'm done. I'm not going to keep dredging this up as an issue. I'll help the kid to deal with the fact that daddy or mommy can get irritable, and let's just move on. I'm not going to hold on to it. Or a spouse who doesn't give compliments, a spouse who's very slow to affirm, if you will. How long are you going to hold on to that? How long are you going to say, you know, he doesn't compliment me, and that's always been a sore spot, and I've always not feel priority, and I just don't feel it. How long do you hold on to it? And that's a big thing. That's bigger than socks.
Well, then what's your response, Dr. Ray, you know, as a clinical psychologist, to the mom who says, and this happened to me in the last month, the mom who came to me and said, she said, you know, Mikey, I'm really okay with your example, me not getting the compliments, but I'm finding now with 4 sons, they want to be just like dad. So they will never notice anything of their sister, of me, of Aunt Mary when we go visit her, of our neighbor who not only needs to be shoveled, but needs a visit every, you know, from time to time. So without pointing this out, my sons want to be like my husband. And in part, I am really happy about that. But how do I respond? Because then I'm asking them to grow in virtue to where, and again, I think through the ages of time, kids will imitate behavior far better than they will, you know, learn the academics and then live out what we've taught them on paper. So the imitation being the highest sign of love and praise, then how does this then transfer over into our parenting?
The core question is not, is his way causing problems for other people than me? The core question is, can I change him? You see, once you get to a point in your marriage where you say, I've been working on this for 13, 15, 19 years. I've gotten 3 millimeters down the road. You say to yourself, I've got to, within myself,
Let it go.
Let it go, because if I don't, it's nothing but a scab that just keeps getting ripped. And the woman who came to you and said, I can live with it for me. I can't live with it for what it's doing to my boys. I would say to her, what's your option then? If you can't change him, no matter what reasoning you use, how long will you stay frustrated? Yeah, but my sons are at stake. My sons are at stake. Okay. Then will your frustration help or hurt your sons even more?
Okay, what if she's not frustrated? And in this case, if we can use a real case, she's actually an incredibly patient. She's cultivated a lot of perseverance.
Is this you?
No,
Okay.
She's not patient, okay? She's not.
Anyhow, but the point is it then correct where marriage and parenting, can, cross over the line there to say, yeah, I know, but Johnny, I actually do want you. I want you to cultivate the habit of noticing your sister's new haircut, the great play on the basketball court, when she brought home her schoolwork, you need to respond and say, that's great. But and then his comeback to you is, well, Mom, Dad never does. So then, do you see what I'm saying? Even if we do, let's assume we're not going to change the spouse. Again, in more cases than not, it's the spouse the husband changing the wife. So this is not either side. I'm trying to make an imbalance here. But then is it correct within the game rules of marriage, then as we're parenting, say, I know, and we love Daddy and all, but honey, for you, no, this is a virtue I am going to cultivate, or I want to work with you to cultivate for you. Because in truth, you will be happier. Again, we all know these cases of husbands and wives that really jest about are picture perfect. Yes, there's more going on, but they both bring to the table a lot of virtue, and we see that in their kids. Do you see my question then? When does parenting kind of come in? No, I'm not going to change him. I've cultivated patience for me, but then can I proactively bring this into my parenting? And that's where I think it's tricky, because that can be insulting to the dad.
There's two levels to your question. The first is, you're right. If you are the only one in that marriage that's going to teach that virtue and is going to require those behaviors, then do it. If the kid hides behind, Dad doesn't do it, well, Dad doesn't come go to see Aunt Mary, you're right, and Daddy's 43 years old. Mm-hmm. You're not. You're part of my responsibility. Yeah. Absolutely.
So
I'm not Dad's mom.
In that way too.
But I am Dad's wife, yeah.
But in that way too, it's not that you have to sit there and detract from your husband, and so that the son thinks less of the husband. You can just acknowledge, okay, he doesn't. But let's talk about you.
Well, you got to be gentle about it. You got to say something very gentle, like, "Well, Daddy's a boogerhead." So I think that's something that's just sort of kind of shows charity.
Right. Right.
Even interesting, I had a representative of the church actually say when you get into the upper teens, personally in our experience, even just seeing other kids as well as our own, you can pull a lot off on a 10, 11, 12-year-old. By the time they've pitched in, they've made it to 14, 15, their first, second year of college, they're pretty savvy. They don't miss a whole lot of beats if they're looking. So to say, again, to not deal with it head on, my kids will call me on that. Again, and that's just that real delicacy. Again, we don't want to be uncharitable, but in the same breath, this priest in this one incident did say, no, but you do need to address, that behavior isn't acceptable. We're not going to do that. And when is that not uncharitable and not detraction? That's tricky. I think it's very delicate.
It's not uncharitable, it's not detraction if you're focusing on what's going on. Mm-hmm. Daddy doesn't go visit Aunt Hilda.
Or Daddy doesn't go to Mass.
Daddy doesn't go to Mass. That's right, honey. Daddy is grown up. I do good things, I do bad things. Daddy does good things, Daddy does bad things. That's why you got a mommy and a daddy. You take the best from both of us. Mm-hmm. And so, therefore, we're going to Mass. I want to be the one to show you how important this is. Well, why doesn't Dad think it's important? You have to understand, a technique of children that's one of the best is, I don't want to do this, so I'm going to cite whichever parent or adult I can cite. That's exactly right.
Divide and conquer.
The matter is not, I don't have to because Dad doesn't have to. Much of the time, the matter is, I don't want to, and oh, by the way, I'll throw Dad up in your face. Yes.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
So, in that sense, you're not getting resistance because of Dad. You're going to get resistance anyway. Mm-hmm. But now,
Dad was the scapegoat.
Dad was, in some sense, yeah.
Well, plus as your kids get older, when you have these discrepancies, all of us fail to live up to our standards to some degree. And I think it's important.
In was March
Yeah,
of 1981.
The one time.
That
The
I
one
did.
time. But I think it's
You weren't born yet then.
Well, that's true.
But I think it's important for our kids to hear us say, he's responsible for the choices he makes. And if we know, for example, that you need to go to Mass, you need to go to Mass. And we'll keep encouraging Daddy or whatever, but Dad ultimately is responsible for that, or Mom, or whatever that failing may be. To not let that be something where the kid says, oh, because he doesn't do it, I don't have to. He's responsible for what he's doing or failing to live up to. And in the same way, I'm going to be held accountable as your mom for teaching you that right standard. And that right standard here means that I insist that you go.
Well, here's the question then. Do you automatically think that the spouse who is teaching the most negative behavior or the less positive will win out over the spouse who's teaching positive? If you say, Dad doesn't go to Mass, so ultimately the kid is going to look at Dad and say, the best way to approach Mass is not to go because that's what my dad does, as opposed to the best way to approach Mass is to go because that's what my mother does. Is there something there that you think naturally children are inclined to the more negative example?
No, I think it's who they identify with or who they feel closest to perhaps at the moment. But I know there are studies out there that show that, for example, taking Mass attendance, if the father does not attend Mass, it has a real negative effect on children's religiosity, especially sons' practice of their faith. So I think that's a legitimate concern. But as you point out, one that you can handle charitably and one that you have to know in terms of your marriage relationship. Maybe it's just time you step back and you let them take responsibility for whatever it is they're doing or not doing, but you don't let that become another source of constant friction or tension between the two of you as husband and wife.
One of the biggest struggles I see in marriages over and over in therapy, among friends, among people I know, is I really want to make you into what I want to make you into. You are not doing it the way I want you to do it. You're not thinking the way I want you to think. You don't blow your nose the way I want you to blow your nose.
How long does it take a couple before they give up on trying to change the other person?
Can I? I'm hesitant to say this. I'm really hesitant to say this, but what the heck?
You're among friends here.
Anecdotally, my experience is the ladies more often want to change the men than the men do the ladies.
We were hardwired to do that.
Yes,
Yeah,
there is a
absolutely.
certain amount of getting in there and shift this the way it's supposed to be. You're supposed to act this way.
But that is, I think, almost inherent to our vocation. I mean, a man can walk away and say, whereas a woman is going to be, well, it's our neighbor and I can help, and honey, come on, let's go over and we can, fix it. Now, if I give you a car or a broken toaster, sure, maybe you're more hardwired to fix that. But relationally, women are much more, I think, called by God to do that again. But that can fall out of balance.
That's what happens.
Yeah.
It's my wife one time, after a series of calls from the women at the church, turned to me and said, do you know what I think about us? I think we would rather be married to a woman. Now, she was not implying anything sexual.
Right.
She was implying, I want somebody who thinks like me.
Right.
I want somebody who's more along my communication lines, somebody more along my talking lines. I want somebody that feels like I do. And that constant frustration with guys as guys.
As guys.
Very
Right.
much so.
And that fails to respect the plan that God has. It's husbands and wives are meant to be complementary, which means we're not going to be the same. And it's not only futile, but it's destructive oftentimes. If I try to change my husband into a female version of me, or the male version of me, but what's essentially a female personality.
Female version of you that can lift heavy things,
Right.
basically.
But I think we have to go back to, we have to look at what is God's plan. And I'm sure you bring this up all the time in your marriage counseling and in sessions with couples, bringing them back to, okay, well, where do you want your marriage to go? Isn't that where we really have to start?
Usually in my couples, I usually have to start with, well, let's try to keep you out of divorce court first. That's where they want to go most immediately.
So I mean, by the time they get to
Oh
you,
my,
they've pretty
oh
much
my.
decided.
Yeah, it's one of the secrets of marriage counseling. It's a very frustrating endeavor because people come in and basically say, change her, change him. If she would change, we'd have a happy marriage. Well, if he would change, I'd have a happy marriage. Change that other person. I got to share with you, you'll love this example. They did a study. Married couples. They said, I want you to separate, go into different rooms, and I want you to write down everything about your spouse that needs change.
Changing, yeah.
Yes. They came back with lists this long.
From both husband and the wife.
Then they said, now, go back into the rooms, and I want you to write down everything about you that needs changing.
Okay, done.
Postage stamp. They came in on a postage stamp. And interestingly enough, part of the way they phrased it was, well, there's probably times when I
maybe.
I sometimes get a little agitated, and I probably shouldn't do that. Yes, we're very gentle on ourselves, of course. You, I know exactly what's wrong with you, and I can list it in alphabetical order according to the presidential term that it occurred in.
Well, again, it's that plank and speck. You know, again, that, and I think we have to be aware in marriage that we will naturally see someone else's faults. And clearly, the evil one does not want us to see our faults, because the more we can bask in the sin, the more his kingdom can win.
So one of the tips then for couples in marriage is going to be to focus less on your spouse's faults, perhaps.
Yeah.
To fix your own faults to the extent you can, to know when to keep your mouth shut.
But you brought up the word pathological. Unpack that a little bit.
Part of the problem, if you get into a marriage that is deeply disturbed, you got someone into alcoholism, someone into serial affairs maybe, or there's a nastiness bordering on abuse or into it every so often. At that point, the person has to, if they're obviously staying in the marriage, to attempt to make whatever home they can, particularly for the children, they have to accept certain realities, the hardest realities to accept. I don't have a fulfilling marriage. I don't have a committed spouse. I don't have someone that shares my very soul. I don't have that. And
that's okay.
And that is at some level.
Brings them to the
So that acceptance, yeah.
How many courageous spouses do you know that you look at the marriage they're in and you say, she gives 97.26% of this marriage, he gives under 2%. Of course, I see marriages like that. And I tell women like that, or men, I say, you know, you're my heroes. You are truly my heroes. I would cross the street to talk to you as opposed to talking to a celebrity.
Do you ever advocate divorce?
You view it in the church's wisdom. You view it in the church's wisdom. Sometimes they have to get out of there for protection sake.
So only when the safety and the life of the wife or the husband.
Well,
There's certain circumstances there can be a divorce for financial protection, protection of the children.
Right.
The church would say, obviously, you're still married, but you're living apart.
You need to pursue the protection of the law, you know, if someone's
So the key word is acceptance.
At some level, it is, because an awful lot of our marriages are good. They're 84.62% satisfying. Why is it? What is it about our human nature? Of course, it's our sin nature. We focus on the fact that my wife leaves the cupboard doors open, or my wife is a nag with the kids, or my wife really doesn't kiss me as long as I'd like her to kiss me. We focus on that stuff, as opposed to saying what a good mom she is otherwise, or how sweet she is towards her mother, how nice she treats her mother, that kind of thing.
Well, maybe one of the techniques is, somebody passed this on to me in parenting, you know, to see the good. You know, we've been talking here about marriages and really focusing on the good traits of our spouse. You know, this was a parenting tip to when you have a confrontation with your children, sit down and write everything you love. Well, I'm really mad at her right now. No, write down everything you love. Perhaps, you know, we'll do part 2 here on marriage, but again, we need to really be focusing on all that is good in our marriages. Well, that concludes our session. This is Parenting Today, real life, real people, real faith. We're here with Dr. Ray Guarendi. Please join us for part 2 of what a Catholic, holy, godly marriage looks like. Thank you for joining us.